those of you who got an invite, welcome to NerdProm.
No matter where in the world you are, we're all Nerds International. With the hyphen. Nerds International proudly presents.
We want to take you on a quest for knowledge. One that will take us from ancient medieval fantasy across the far reaches of space to the distant future. To many savage worlds.
Welcome to the Wild Eye Podcast, episode 54.
This is a podcast dedicated to Pinnacle Entertainment's Savage Worlds, aimed at the beginner and veterans alike.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Well done, man. I'm proud
You're
of you,
welcome.
Paris. You're like a real boy.
Thank you. I'm a real boy.
Growing up so fast.
So what's on the menu today, Eric? We've got some very exciting stuff we're going to be talking about. Isn't that right?
Yeah, we're gonna open the books. There were a bunch of questions, and I decided to pick two, and we'll see what comes out of it. We'll get to them later, but yeah, we received a lot of feedback too from our last two shows. We had one about setting rules, and another one a review of TimeZero. So we'll look at that. Rob Towell. He says, great episode. I tend to agree with Harrison that the dueling rules for Deadlands are not very good. I've done it a few times and find it brings the game to a screeching halt, as even if the GM knows the rules, the players want to look them up and ask the common questions so they can make decisions. Savage Rifts has the same thing with their special death and defeat table. Also, I think of Critical Failures and Joker's Wild as house rules. Those of us using them in every game and those who do not like them tend to not use them even when suggested. P.S. More than 3 setting rules and I will resent the author and say bad things about them and their parents on the internet.
Are you sure Harrison Hunt isn't Rob Towell? More than 3 settings, and he's going to resent the author and say bad things about them?
Kill them? No, Harrison would have said kill them. At least Rob is kind of decent enough. He'll just say bad things about someone.
I'm really jealous. Rob has players that look at rules, not
That's a good
expect
point, yeah.
me to know them all.
Yeah. No, I mean, 3, that means that he probably hates 90% of all the settings out there because most of them have more than 3 setting rules. So, I don't know. Like I told him before, it's kind of harsh, 3 setting rules. But yeah, less is more. And that's what came out of it, I think, during that episode on setting rules. I was trying to play devil's advocate a little bit because, I mean, you look at the success that Savage Rifts had and still continues to have. There's a lot of people still playing it, so I'm wondering if we're just a sample of the population that's really pro less setting rules, where a lot of newer players maybe don't really mind having more setting rules because apparently a lot of people are playing that game. So I don't know.
Do they play with all the setting rules though?
Probably not.
Isn't Savage Rifts like so big that you only use some setting rules within certain areas? I haven't played it,
Could be. I mean, like I pointed out, I think there's only 5 in the book, but then there's a little bits and pieces here and there that changes the rules too that aren't really setting rules. So I don't know. Maybe we'll need to have another episode, or maybe the Murder Hobo Show can talk about that since they have their own Savage Rifter series.
Yeah, Victor Diaz is good at that stuff, man. He knows all the rules. He can even tell you what book certain areas are in, which is actually pretty sweet. The guy's a solid fountain of information. As far as Rob Towell goes and his, I tend to agree with Harrison. You could suck it, Rob, for starters. So we're gonna go right there.
What I like about
I'm
Rob
just kidding,
Towell,
buddy.
Shut up, Gary. What I like about Rob Towell is that he is obviously a very smart man, Anyone that tends to agree with me, hey, you're all right. Come round for dinner anytime.
Mm-hmm.
But the dueling rules.
So-
Shut up a minute, right? Because the next one comes in from John Steve, right? And he says, like most
No,
things.
we're not done with Rob.
No, we are done. We are done. Because listen to this.
No.
He says, John Steve says, like most things, I see both sides of the dueling issue. I think it adds unique flavour to Deadlands, but it's used so infrequently that it remains clumsy for the GM. How about that one, Gary? Boom. 2 shots. Rob Towle agrees with me. John Steve agrees with me. How'd you like that? Oof.
Okay, so back to Rob Towle's deal. He says he's done it a few times and it brings the game to a screeching halt. I like that sentence because that's the premise of the duel. It's supposed to stop everything and just come down to this duel. You don't ever see 2 guys walk out in the street and within seconds pull their guns out and just start blam blam blam. Also, there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out too. So in the dueling episode that we did last time, if you read the rules, it says that you guys had made a comment about why you just don't like blast somebody in the street and stuff like that. And it literally says, like, second paragraph in, that each combatant waits for the other to go for his gun before drawing and firing. And then it says, you see, if you just skin your hog leg and shoot someone, it's murder. But if he draws first, it's self-defense. So there's still like a full-on art thing to this whole deal. Secondly, never let your players pull out the books and start reading the rules. That's why I hate Monster Manual in 5th edition. You start pulling out some random monster and your stupid-ass players bust out their Monster Manual and try and find out its weakness or something. That drives me mental, man.
But that's
I would
different.
never let that happen.
If they're pulling it out just to read about dueling, which their characters are actually allowed to do, that's different. And not only that, but
How dare they?
What happens often, what John and Rob are saying, is that it's the GM pulling out the book because they don't know how to do it because it's used so infrequently. Boomtown. Me, Rob, and John, we win, man, we win.
Yeah.
You've been goofed.
Sorry, I got to back Gary on this one. Like, he's right. Don't pull out the rules in that situation.
You're
just
fired,
play it
Paris.
through.
You're fired. Get out the podcast.
As he goes, I just don't start me, Harrison. Let the GM do his thing. The players play it. If they have any questions, like for the next time they do a duel, then check the book. But don't hold the game up while everyone checks the rules. It's not a war game, man. It's a role playing game.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
No, I agree with you, Paris.
And damn you for making me agree with Gary again.
No, I agree with you. What
Do you guys remember?
What I would do in the game is I would just do what I think they are at the time and then look it up afterwards, as Paris says. Never get the book out during the game because that's always boring. There is never, in the history of role-playing games since they've ever come out, there's never been a fun time whenever the GM says, oh, don't worry, I'll just check the rules. That has never, ever been fun once ever. Fact. And if anyone can ever tell me when that's been fun, then you're a liar and a thief and a cheat and you should burn in hell.
That's a little stiff, I'm just saying.
I'm with Harrison on that one too.
Also,
bring the book out, lose the fun.
You do remember that I said in the last podcast when we were talking about this that I make it happen. I offer bennies to get into duels, and then I'll make up situations why they would be getting in duels. Like the last guys that I had duels with Andrew. He was a mad scientist, and he got in a duel with another guy that had the I guess first prototype of the weapon that Andrew was using, and they squared off in town with like man, I don't know what it does, some kind of weird like ectoplasmic shooting, ghost rock blasting kind of weird gun. It wasn't a 6-shooter. It was 2 mad scientists using the dueling rules to shoot each other because one of them had stole the plans for the actual item he was
Death
using.
Star.
Yeah.
In the
All right. Anyways, John Steve.
Yeah, John Steve. No, we've already. He was just kind of backing that up, saying that in the dueling issue, it's used so infrequently that it remains clumsy for the GM. You know, they're always looking it up and things like this. So it was kind of adding on to what Rob Towle says. But he did follow up in John Steve's email, and he said, I'm not a fan of tons of setting rules. Keep the list short and sweet. The closer to raw, the better. Rules as written, the better. So I guess what he means is the closer to original Savage rules. What do you guys think? I think we're all in agreement there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on that before, where we like Savage Worlds because of the flow of the game, and I think for Harrison and I, the dueling rules, that's where the flow of the game is kind of broken by that. That's all we're saying. It breaks the flow. That's all.
I think as well, whatever works for your table works for your table. Clearly, Gary, you're having fun with the dueling, so that's all good. I mean, as we've mentioned before, that's wrong fun, and that's bad fun. It's non-Christian fun as well, which I hate. But in
Illegal fun.
Terry Hansen comes in and he says, I started a house rule that whenever a wild card is dealt a 2 in combat, they get a Benny. This helps lessen the sting a bit.
That's cool. I did the same thing. When I was playing, lowest card always got a Benny. Yep. It just you want to reinforce the Benny economy amongst your players, like that you're not going to cheapen out, and that way they just start doing amazing and crazy cool things, and they'll start throwing bennies at it. I do love when they throw bennies at notice checks. That's my favorite, though.
To me, that just says a lot about society today when we give trophies to kids that finish last. So that, to me, giving a Benny just because you were dealt the bad card, that I don't know. Exactly. It's like, oh, you missed your roll. I'm going to give you a Benny. I feel bad for you.
Oh, dude, you should have done that in your grognard voice.
When you lose HP, the GM gives you a slap in the back, too. Punch you in the ear.
Anyway, I think that, giving people bennies simply because they're in a bad situation is a bit naff.
Where's your empathy, man? Where's your sorrow for humanity? Like, seriously, what's wrong with you guys? Nobody cares about other people and their feelings anymore. That's the problem with this world.
Hey, life is unfair, Deal with it.
Yeah.
Life is unfair. When you've got the pot of bennies, you could dole out a benny every round to somebody. You cheap benny. You know what? You're like the 1% with your benny pot. That's what I'm saying. Maybe it's time to welfare some bennies out.
Players are food for the GM, and I eat them.
I got to agree with Eric on that one. There too many bennies, and you lose creativity, man. Because every time, if you fail, you roll the dice. You fail, you hand in a benny, keep the benny economy going. There still has to be that element of the game where failure has to be overcome and adapted to. Otherwise, just go watch a movie.
Exactly.
Don't you think?
It happens.
Yeah. Go sit on your mommy's lap and suck your thumb.
I swear
That's what my brother used to do. My brother, every time I picked on him, he'd go see my mom, and then my mom would put him on her lap and then, pet him. And, oh, poor Justin, Eric was mean to you. That. It's like a lollipop. There, have a lollipop because you had a bad day, And then the kid grows up and bad things happen to him. And he's like, where's my lollipop? I had a bad day. Now let's eat a bucket of ice cream.
You hear that, Terry and Gary? You both suck.
And Justin, did you hear that, Justin?
Next up, we actually got a lot of feedback. Well, not a lot, but we got a bit of feedback about my TimeZero review. Famously, I said that TimeZero was a stinker. And so we got a bit of feedback. First up comes from Jake S. He says, I feel that you might be coming at the setting at the wrong angle. Yes, because obviously you can have a wrong opinion, can't I, Jake? It has some things that you can take out of it. It could be a lot of fun in the right hands.
I think that's what I was trying to get at during the interview for the review, is asking you if, you could pull out some of the rules and edges and hindrances out of it to, use them wherever you want. And every time I kept asking you about that, you say, no, it's just too intertwined with the setting. You can't even use those elements. So
I do think that it is, though, because all of the edges and hindrances and all of this stuff revolve around this sort of like really highly constrained time travel. I don't know if there's anything in there that you could take out of it and put in another game. I don't think it's that exciting and that worth buying the book for. So I stand by what I said. End of story. Thanks for the feedback, Jake.
Fair enough.
I like that he says that he feels that you might be coming at it from the wrong angle. Like, I think what he's trying to say is coming at it like dead on in a freight truck is probably not the way to approach TimeZero, because holy crap, you just steamrolled the entire setting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just the thing is, but as I say, I stand by it. I mean, I read it with an open mind, and I read it really wanting to enjoy it. It looked awesome. I love time travel stuff, and I really, really wanted to enjoy it. And the fact that I steamrolled it was not on purpose. I thought that it looked awesome, and I'm really upset that I didn't enjoy it. I actually thought it was terrible. So Luis Alfaro comes in with one. Great guy, friend of the show. I think it will work using it with the bad guys, as so many restrictions will make the game not fun. It will be cool to destroy something and fight against the time cops. It will probably be a short span campaign, as you could probably destroy too much too early, but at least it will be a fun short campaign to remember. And that's not actually a bad idea, because you could, just go around just goofing up time and stuff like this. But then, like he says, you could quite easily, it maybe last one session. Let's say, for instance, you just go try to get Hitler to win the war. Because that's what it's going to be, isn't it?
Yeah, blow up Time Epsilon. But I think we raised that point during the episode where we said that playing the independents would be fun, but then again, they don't provide a lot of resources for the independents. So that's where we felt that it wasn't really a good angle.
Yeah, and you still don't have direct control of time and things like this, so it's not really, I don't know, it's not really that fun anyway. It's just really a different spin on the same thing.
You're not allowed to control the timeline.
Yeah, you're literally not. So the last one we actually got in this morning from a guy called RPG Group, which I think is a great name for a person. He said, "Don't believe it. TimeZero is an awesome game. My group and I have enjoyed hours of fun with this setting. It is versatile enough to handle the many possible eras in the historical continuum and deep enough to deal with the philosophical ramifications of time travel. Judge for yourselves." I agree. Buy this, judge it for yourself, and don't listen to what I said. As I say, it's just my personal opinion. I thought it was garbage, but you guys might like it. I did say in my review that maybe I'm the wrong audience for it because I really, really vehemently disliked it. But the point is that you might actually really like it. So do judge for yourself. Have a look at it. Maybe there's a free demo on their website. I don't know. But have a look and see if you like it. Do judge for yourself because it's entirely possible, like this guy, RPG Group, that you might have a great time with it. And I completely agree. I am mucking around when I get so angry about it.
Is it that you didn't like the book or you don't like time travel in general?
I absolutely love time travel. It's one of my favourite genres, and I feel like this book did it in the most basic way possible and badly.
Yeah, I would never do time travel. I think the idea of it sucks. It's horrible, man. Like time travel games basically boil down to 4 or 5 people sitting around a table trying to think of ways they could use the time to screw the DM over. Like you even said on the podcast, you've got this one guy that's like, well, why don't we just go back 5 minutes before and shoot him or take him out as a baby? Well, and that's what they sort of boil down to. It's
whenever you introduce time travel into a campaign, that's what happens, and then so what TimeZero does is place loads of restrictions to stop that from happening, and therefore sort of all TimeZero then becomes is a setting hopping game. That's all it really is, and as fun as that might be, Savage Worlds can already do that, and it's almost entirely pointless. The only thing you need TimeZero for essentially is those restrictions. That's the only thing you really need that book for if you want to play this. So it's, to me, it's kind of a pointless book, and that's what I said in my review. I do stand by that, but as I said, if it's your cup of tea and you like it, fantastic. But it's really, really not mine. And yeah, that review is full of my personal opinions because that's what a review is. But if you don't agree with them, I think that's fantastic because that means that somebody's work that they put a lot of hard work into is going to get some sales. And I really hope that people do actually enjoy it. But as Gary said, time travel games don't work. And in this case, I don't think it's worked either. They've put a lot of hard work into putting all these restrictions on it, and all they've made is a product that's not fun.
What about you, Paris? Have you ever ran a time travel campaign?
No, No time. None. With the players or my friends that I've had in the past, I think I'd have the same problem. If time was involved, they would tweak it to the nth degree, and the game would bog down into no one getting anywhere. But just going back quickly to what Harrison was saying, obviously RPG or the gentleman or the group RPG group, I get the impression maybe they had sort of a concept of time travel games in the first place, and this fit their mold. So where you were looking for something specific to time travel style games and didn't find it, maybe he found what they were looking for in that book. Wow, I just got very diplomatic.
I wasn't necessarily looking for something specific. I just knew, well, I'd heard good things about this because apparently I heard that the system solves the problem of time travel games. And when I read it, I was like, it does. It just takes any fun out of it. And then also the actual setting is so bland and boring. And I was like, that's fine because I can strip that out. But it does solve the problem, but it's also very boring. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with it, and I was absolutely gutted, to be perfectly honest. And usually when I read a book like this, especially with Savage Worlds, you find a couple of things that you can use elsewhere, and I really didn't find that with this. I found that it was all quite linked to what was going on, for the most part, and I was like, yeah. I mean, the one thing that you could take from it and put elsewhere is the synths as a race, but they were so rubbish that I was just like, well, I know I'm not going to use it. It's like, yeah, there is stuff you could put in other games, but none of it's actually that good.
When you say it's rubbish, and this isn't a go at you, is it that you didn't get it? Like, you didn't sort of get what the author's vision was, or you just thought it was that badly written that no one would get it?
I felt like it was... It sounds bad to say, but I just felt like a lot of it was bland. It was quite bland. And there was quite a lack of imagination, because I felt like all their effort, creativity, and the heart and the passion went into the time travel stuff. So when it came to things like, let's say for example, if you find a setting you don't like, oftentimes what you do is you take the gear and the edges and the hindrances and things like this, and then you port those into other systems, right? And you just go, cool, I didn't like the setting, but I got this cool gun, and you'll take it elsewhere. But in this, it was like, okay, well, the gear and that, let's say, for example, the grenades, the jets, things like this, it's all just quite bland, because all of their effort went into the time travel stuff. So all of the time travel edges and hindrances, if you're not using that, well, then what's left is just stuff that's, well, been done better in all the other sci-fi settings. So it sounds like a bit like what we talked about with the settings episode, was that settings need to capture or mesh, or at least from my perspective, they need to capture or mesh with the Savage Worlds philosophy or the Savage Worlds way of play. Yeah. So is that the big issue you had with this? Like, yes, there were some setting rules, happy days, but it didn't seem to gel with what we knew Savage Worlds to be. Yeah, and I suppose one of my biggest issue was that it felt a little bit soulless, and that's what it is. And the thing about a lot of Savage Worlds settings is they always have like a really good feel to them, and a lot of author sort of passion and things like this. And this felt like it had a bit pretty soulless feel to it. It's like, okay, we've got this period, tick, this period, tick, this period, time travel, tick, and oh, we need to have futuristic gear, tick. But it didn't really have any actual passion or drive or creativity behind those elements. It just felt like a big load of check boxes, and that was it.
I feel like right now you're psychoanalyzing Harrison. Like, imagine that he's laying on the couch and Paris is his what do you call him, psychologist or something like that, and he's like, so why did you give this such a bad review, Harrison? No, it's good to time travel.
It's good to get it out, though, because I feel like this book touched me, and I can't show you where.
I was going to say, Harrison, please point here on the Savage World book where this setting touched you inappropriately.
There's some seriously stupid things that drive me mental. Like, Terminator was a fantastic movie, but they used the same premise. He can't come back from the future with any of his clothes or any of his weapons or any of that stuff, because only flesh can travel through time. Why is beyond me. It was never explained, but it's one of those things that they threw it in there just to make a story. The funny part is like, they wrapped him in flesh. He had a metal cage. Ha ha, tricked you, time. I got you, time. I fooled you, time. look what I did. I wrapped metal in flesh, and I shipped it back in time. Why didn't they just wrap the frickin' weapons from the future in skin bags and ship the bloody things back too? Then he could have, like, just unpeeled the skin off the gun and away he went. Like, there's just these are the problems with time travel games, and these are the reasons I would never play them. And it's just, and now that I'm thinking about it, you guys are getting me a touch riled up here, because you even said the same bloody thing. Why don't you just give your gear to the guy that actually can take it through, and then he portals in next to you and just gives you your gear? These are the stupid reasons why I will never play a friggin' time traveling game, because this is the stuff that your players will do. They'll be like, you'll be at the table, you're like, haha, mate, you can't take your gear through the time. and then he'll be like, here, Jimmy, take me gear. So I was playing in Paris's game there.
But yeah, there's little things to stop you from doing that. For example, it's more expensive to go back to the same time period twice. So you can't. Let's say, for example, it takes more energy.
Why?
So it does. Yeah.
Why?
You ask why? Well, the book doesn't say. But anyway, point is, it takes more energy. But let's say, for example, you go back once, and do it as a recon mission. Have a look. That means the second time you do it, you're going to be way more efficient, because you've already scouted it out. So it would actually make more sense to spend the extra energy and do it twice. I mean, it's little things like that would just break the game. If you're a player, your players are always going to think like this, and they would go. You would go to your boss and say, "Look, I know this is going to be more expensive, but if this mission is that important, we should go back twice."
So really what you were hoping for was a chapter that would allow you to go back in time before you read the book and stop yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to find it, Paris, but yeah, I don't know. It's little things like that. I dislike it. If you have fun with it, fantastic. It was one of those ones. I've read it from cover to cover, and I do not think that I will ever play it, because I think it's just soulless and bad. So, but we do need to move on, because we spent a lot of time in the old feedback segment here. So, next up, we are going to move on to some Savage Worlds news and Nerds International announcements.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the news. The news is incoming. Prepare yourself for the news. News! And some announcements about the Nerds International Network and the Wild Die podcast.
All right, the news. Savage Con, another Savage Con. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that one. That's a name ripoff from the Spanish Savage Con. Yeah, that's a different one, right?
It is a different one to the Spanish Savage Con, and it is running on July 21st to July 22nd. It's £10 to get in. What do you get for your £10? Well, you get all sorts of games. You get to play in a room of a pub which we've rented. This is going to be in Red Hill on those dates, and it is going to be above the Toby Carvery on the first day, and then round the corner in the Junction on the next day. This is in Red Hill in the UK, and it is run by yours truly, my mate Peter, and a bunch of our mates, and it is going to be amazing. I'm going to be running a game called I'm going to be running Flash Gordon, and my game is called Flash Gordon, Jack of all trades, blaster of nuns. So come and play that, and we've got loads of good games coming there as well. We've got some rippers going on. We've got Savage Mystery Men. It's going to be awesome. So yeah, do come along if you're in the UK. I would recommend travelling. We got one guy coming from the north. We got some people come from all over the place. So yeah, please come along to Savage Con. There is a page on Facebook.
Aliens versus Rednecks, right?
Yeah,
someone's running Aliens versus.
Yeah, I don't know who wrote that, but I've heard some great things about Aliens vs. Rednecks. Apparently, it's one of the greatest adventures for Savage Worlds ever written, and somebody is actually running that at SavageCon, so it's going to be awesome.
It's before its time.
Mm-hmm.
Before it's time zero. Why?
No, people are saying.
Why didn't you call it like? Go ahead.
People are saying about Aliens vs. Rednecks that it's the new D&D, and it's going to surpass all role-playing games. So check that out, Drive Through RPG right now. Also SavageCon.
Why? I got an idea. You should actually make your own time travel game, your own Aliens versus Rednecks time travel adventure.
I'll call it Time One.
That's what I think. Hey, you can call it whatever you want. SavageCon? Why don't you call it like Savage Brexicon or Inglicon or Red Hillicon?
So that people know it's a Savage Worlds Con.
Okay, so NIVCon, September 15th to 16th. What's that all about?
That's the second one. We had one back in April, I think, for Nerds International. Like a dozen games that ran for over the weekend. It's a virtual convention, so everybody's welcome to join. We just announced the dates, but stay tuned for more information as we start taking GM submissions, their events and all that. And it's not just Savage Worlds, of course, it's Nerds International, so it's going to be a bunch of different games on different platforms. Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, Tabletop Simulator. It isn't all RPGs. It can be card games and board games, that kind of stuff too. So yeah, it's free. We don't charge for it. You just need a computer and a headset and some programs on your computer, and you can play. I think we're warmed up enough. Now we can move on with Open the Books with questions from our listeners.
Now, little Jimmy, you know what time it is?
Is it really?
Why, yes. It is that time indeed. It's time to open up the books.
Yes.
So, go over to Grandpa's bookshelf and go and pick any book you like. And then we'll open it up and we'll have a good look inside.
What about this one?
No, not that one. No, that's Grandpa's special book for his alone time.
Oh, okay, what about this one?
No, not that one either. That's, no, you know what, in fact, bugger off. Go away. No, I don't want to do this anymore.
Oh.
Open up the books.
So our first question is from Conrad, our good friend Conrad. He says, so I have a question that could also be a main topic for you. With all the plot point campaigns out there, how do you run them so that the players actually feel they have a choice about where to venture, what to undertake? There are two sub-issues I have with this. One, I'm always struggling to show the players just how open the world is, that they can deviate from the plot hook right in front of their nose. And two, many plot point campaign adventures are really railroady. How would you turn a railroady adventure into something more open? Like the first plot points from the Flood, or the first adventure from the Sundered Skies PowerPoint campaign, Scavenger Hunt. So plot point campaigns, yeah. For those who don't know what it is, here's a little piece here from the Pinnacle site. Plot points are how most of our Savage settings are constructed. The idea is to communicate a big backstory, like the flooding of the world in 50 Fathoms, but still give GMs the freedom to construct and run their own stories in the foreground. The other goal is to allow the GM to open the book and run an adventure almost instantly. Back in the beginning, Jamie and Blaine had an episode about plot point campaigns, so if you want to find out a bit more about it, go listen to that one. So I know Harrison and I don't really run plot point campaigns. Gary has started a couple times, and I think Paris, you're running ETU. Is it the Degrees of Horror campaign that you're running?
That is correct. Yep.
So
is it Degrees of Blood or Degrees of Horror?
Horror, yeah.
Whatever the main one is. It's called.
Maybe you guys can chime in on that. How do you do it? I would imagine you don't run every plot point adventure right in a row. How do you make it so that players can actually do their own things and not be worried about taking care of the overarching plot there?
That's how I did it. You know my motto, man. Screw the players. I'm the one that did all the prep. This is my story.
So when you run it, Gary, you run them like in sequence, or you allow some room in between?
No, I ran the Flood in sequence, literally back to back to back to back to back, because I have so much freaking Savage Worlds material that I want to get to. I don't need to play all of I wanted to know what the story of the flood was, because the book, the four horsemen of the apocalypse with Deadlands and stuff like that. Like the flood has what's his face? I don't want to give it away or any of that stuff, but he's one of the horsemen, right? Like there's like a full story behind it, and I wanted my players to see that. So rather than have them go off and do mundane, I don't even want to say mundane, but just other things that weren't wrapped around the plot point campaign, I just said no. I said this is how we're going to do this. This is a 10-session adventure, because I think there's maybe 10 plot points in it, however many there was. And every time we showed up, we did a start to finish. First plot point, I believe, the one that he's talking about, the very first plot point in the flood is the one where they're on the train. It starts on a train, the train blows up, you get attacked by Indians, and you really have to drive your players underground into the Underground Railway, where you meet O'Malley. I can't remember his name. No, not O'Malley. Who's the Hellstrom? You meet Hellstrom for the first time. Yeah, he's underground. You find out that he's building this underground railroad, blah, 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 and you help him do some stuff. So here's the problem with that module, or that plot point is, what if your players decide not to go underground? What if they decide to go to the back of the bus or the back of the train instead of the front of the train? So what I tend to do is, I don't care which way they go, they're going to find the hole that takes them underground. If they want to chase the Indians that are shooting them, that's how the story starts. You're on the train crashes, all the smoke clears, the green ghost rocks, fumes and stuff like that clear. And you can, as you come to, you just see like people getting picked off. Ladies have arrows in their chests. Indians are driving around shooting you from the forest and stuff like that. And you just go from there. So no matter what they do, they're going to find the hole. Be it they walk to the front of the train, that's where the hole is. They go to the back, that's where the big hole is that takes them to the Underground Railway. Or they chase the Indians into the bush, they're going to find another hole. Because no matter what, that's how I steer them. I steer them. That's what I do. Like driving kids around, I steer them.
Choo-choo.
Exactly.
Conductor.
Yep. I'm proud of it, dude. If you want to play the games and you want to experience the adventures, this is how you go about it. This is the stuff that I've prepped for. I've said it a million freaking times. You even actually earlier in this podcast alone you're like, well, what? And I don't know if it was you, Eric. I think it might have been Paris. Basically said, oh wow, you've got players that actually read the book. That is my point. I spend hours prepping this stuff. I got to read it. I got to find the maps. I got to make sure I know the adventure inside and out. I got to know the dueling rules. Like, I prep for my games. And when it comes time to play them, I'm railroading my characters. I don't care. I don't care what the right way to do it is.
Yeah, but hold on here. Here, I'm going to read that sentence again. Okay?
Which one?
The other goal of a plot point campaign is to allow the GM to open the book and run an adventure almost instantly without prep. So you're missing the point.
He's got
I have to
Gary.
unmute my mic. You can't. Dude, it's going to take you 40 to 45 minutes just to read it. To get through the first plot point campaign, even if it's like 2 pages or something like that. And usually when I read it, I'll read it multiple times. There's characters' names. You have to sort of get the gist. Like, when you want to be a crap GM, sure, go ahead. So I'm going to say it outright. You want to be that guy? Sit down and start reading the first paragraph, and then play that first paragraph with your friends, not knowing what is coming next. You just can't do that. But seriously, what are you thinking?
I agree.
Anyways, that said,
you're not helping.
Without being a dick, all I'm saying is when I ran the plot point campaign, I basically sat down with my players and I said, listen, I have this book. There is a story. There's X amount of plot points. I want to get through them. This is what I wanted to do. So I'm like, we're not going to do weird side adventures or any of that kind of stuff. We're just going to stick with the flood plot point campaigns. There's some great material there, man. That is a really good freaking whatchamacallit. And I wasn't interested in doing sidetracks or weird stuff. And I'll tell you what, here's the other thing too. It sounds bad maybe coming out of my mouth, but I'm telling you, when we went to Chi-Town, I don't think it's called Chi-Town, whatever the Chinese town is to the north, on the way there, we rolled into a bar that had a bowling alley in it in the 1870s. And the madam of the house or the head of the bar or something like that came down, had a bowling ball that had like a 6-shooter built inside the bowling ball, and you could literally like just stick your fingers in it and turn the dial, and when you throw the ball, the 6-shooter would go off. I've mentioned this before in the podcast. So I do add stuff to the game to make it fun and make it sort of seamless, but I still railroad the hell out of them. They just don't know it. They could suck it.
This, I have to say, I thought I would have very little to add to this conversation, and I really don't have much to add, but this is part of the reason I don't like to run plot point campaigns. What I often do is, if I have a setting, I'll read it, or I'll at least glance over it, and then I'll kind of use it for inspiration. And one of the things, even a lot of adventures. So what I like to do is read them just for inspiration. And I just finished my Solomon Kane campaign, and there's the Path of Kane plot point campaign, and I read it. I thought it was a bit naff, and then I got the Foes of Kane thing, which was just a bunch of monsters with their own adventures, and used those instead, because I found those are much easier to tie together. And it was like, okay, well, the players have their own freedom and stuff like this and can do whatever they want, and then when they end up in this place or that place or whatever, then you've got these adventures that they can play, and those are a bit better, and then they can solve them in a bunch of different ways. But I don't like running plot point campaigns for that reason, is that I don't ever want to railroad people or make them. I know there are creative ways and things like this to get people back on the path and stuff like this, but I find that to be much easier when it's something I've come up with. I know that's probably a kind of lazy way of doing it, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
So if you're creating the content off the top of your head, you're not railroading anybody, because there's no train tracks. Is sort of my point. And I will say that there's so much to this. Like, I've been DMing for 30 some odd years. I'm 47. I've been playing this game since I was 8. I got 39 years of D&D under my belt. I play at my local gaming store every Sunday for I don't know how many years. I've seen so many people come and go. Whoa, important updates are pending. How dare you, Windows, update my spew? I will say this. In all of my years of DMing, I have rarely, and I mean like maybe one time I can name the guy by name, Michael Whitmer, have come across a player that is actually willing to sit down and go toe-to-toe with me when it comes to creating content for the game, if that makes sense. Like, let's take the plot point or the flood or whatever. I'm explaining the Indians and the gunfights and all this other stuff, and he will just add to the story and take it in another direction, if that makes sense. I found one guy in all of my years that will actually play the game in such a way where he'll make things appear that I never said were there. David Scott from GM Hangouts made a comment about player agency, and you don't want to railroad your players because that takes away from player agency. Players don't add anything to the story ever. They just sit there and react to the things that I say, so they can suck it. That's what I'm saying.
You've played with us before, Gary. Yeah. You've played with us. We add stuff to the game.
Yeah, I think that actually might be an offensive comment to us as players.
I don't care.
I think I might be offended.
I don't care. I
would be offended.
Gary, apologize to us.
You guys can suck it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. I don't know, man.
When did you become so jaded? When did your GM heart become so black? What? Dear God. Why do you do this? Why do you play?
I'm telling you, I speak the truth.
This is why.
You guys actually, in your heart, all know it to be true.
No, this is why. This is why, right? There are adventures out there which is specifically written to allow for player agency and things like this, where you can just drop in events when you feel like it and things like this. So the players can do whatever they want, and when you feel like something is maybe needed to spice things up, you can just drop it in there. I'm talking Aliens versus Rednecks, right? See, that is a very well written adventure. And whenever things get boring, you can just drop things in there, right? And that's also a really great way to start off a campaign. So, available now, Drive-Thru RPG. But no, I'm just saying, like, that's the way. I don't necessarily like to run plot points just for that reason. I think they're great, and some of them are fantastically written. It's just that it stresses me out a little bit when I'm trying to follow somebody else's story, because I often I will have a more intricate knowledge of the details when it's something I've written and I know, and I'll often have little bullet points but nothing concrete. And that's all it is. And as great as I think that some of the plot point campaigns are, like, I've read the 50 Fathoms one and I think it's awesome. I don't think I would run it for that very reason. And I think that it's great, a lot of people having these same experiences and being like, oh yeah, what about this bit in the 50 Fathoms one? And it's like, cool, but you could just do something different.
Maybe if you played the TimeZero plot point campaign, you'd really like the setting.
Well, there actually isn't one. There's only one adventure, and it's laughably bad.
Oh, okay. Now I feel bad that I brought it up. I would also like to say, too, that my experience, I don't even want to say experience, the way that I play is basically one-shots all the time. Mm-hmm. I want to sit down and start something and tell a story and have my players interact with that story, because it's really all they do is just interact with the story that I'm telling them. They say something, I respond, blah, blah, blah. And then I want it to conclude so that at the end of it, when I show up next week to start the next session, it doesn't matter if I have people that show up or don't show up. Because I play at my local gaming store and stuff like that, I never know who's going to be there, and not everybody can make it all the time. When I was a kid and we ran Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, a lot of it was modules. A lot of it, like my actual old school gaming group that I played with for, since I was like 8 to the time I was 20 something, before I had kids, we would just sit down, and it was the same thing too, because you never know when you're going to start your next session. When I was growing up, I never had an actual like gaming time. We would get together on the week. Man, even in my 20s, D&D became just drinking. We ended up shaving eyebrows off and chasing people down in our cars so they had to run through ditches and stuff. Like, yeah, it was. I'm gonna stop now.
Yeah, getting off topic a little bit. So, but basically, we only have one guy who's running a plot point campaign and probably running it right. So, what are you doing so that the players and their characters have their own stories within the plot point campaign for ETU?
Oh, for ETU. Okay. Well, just gonna. Oh, man, I feel so bad for you, Gary. You just feel like your heart has been broken somewhere along the line by some bad players, and now you're just like, I'm going to do it my way, and everyone can just suck it. It's just, that's so hot.
I imagine Gary preparing his game. I imagine Gary preparing his game, and he's angry, and he's like pounding on the sheet, and he's like, "There you go, you're gonna fight a demon now. I decided that's what's gonna happen."
But Mr. Gary,
the funny part
can
is,
I go to a weapon shop to buy a weapon? No, you cannot. You stay on the railroad, you scum. Mr. Gary, I only want to buy a dagger. Shut up. Pepe, you get back in cage and get on the railroad. I'm sorry, Mr. Gary.
So hang on. I think.
Do you need a minute? Well, no, take a minute, Paris, and I'll because this is where I'm gonna. This is my retort. Tell us, Mr. Paris Conte, how you run your ETU in a railroad fashion, like I know you're gonna tell us, without actually railroading your players, because you're gonna tell me that you do it in the exact same way that I do it, with just not without the mean part added into it. Like, so let's go. Here we go.
Nope. I do not run my plot campaigns the way that you run them. So, so first of all, the biggest issue that I had with what you said, Gary, was that this game's not about the characters. They're just there.
I never said that.
Yeah, you
they
did.
Are not about my players. That's what I said. There's a difference between the players and the characters.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, but so the players control the characters. So what? The characters have got no agency at all.
Sure, they do. My players once wanted to go to a weapon shop, and I created this wicked guy in this leather shop whose name was Magic Mike. To this day, they still want to go back to Mole Master. In fact, when Mole Master got exploded, they specifically rescued Magic Mike, the leather shop maker, who had this 6-pack. He was covered in leather tanning oil and just wore a loincloth. And everywhere he went, because he had a bum hip, he did the hip thrust like he was dry humping the air.
Yeah,
So
but
he
that's
was
not a
something
plot.
that you created.
That's
Yeah,
not a
hang on.
plot.
Well, what's your point? I'm just saying, I make my games exciting for my players via the Magic Mike hip thrust loincloth lubed up guy.
That's not
I don't think
player
you have
agency,
players.
though,
I
is
think
it?
You play by yourself and just tell the story.
Yeah, you might as well just.
All right, so
Either way,
I'm currently running Degrees of Horror. Yes, it is a plot point campaign. It's actually the first plot point campaign that I am running or have run. Because much like you guys, I've never been very good at telling someone else's story in terms of whether it be a module back in the D&D days or a plot point campaign. I've always felt that a plot point campaign especially was that playtester group, and this is their story. That's what that plot point campaign is. That's how it resulted. But I will read the plot point campaign and I will take the bits out that I feel I can run with and that I feel are relevant and that I feel will engage my players. So there's elements of Degrees of Horror that when I read it, I thought, how would I actually get my players to interact with that bit? I didn't see it interesting them. I didn't see them picking up the clues because it just would have bored them. So while I have done the freshman year now, and it has followed loosely to the plot point campaign, I've altered it. I've changed it to fit the characters and their needs. And the easiest way to do that is to follow first of all, the characters themselves, what they want, what they do, who they are, and their edges and hindrances. So that makes a big difference to how I think plot point games get played, because they will interact with the story how I feel differently than what the playtest group will. And then because of the actions and the decisions that they make, I have to add things in. You can't just follow it railroad because I can't wrap my head, Gary, around how if you had players and they wanted to go left and you go, we can't go left, we're going right, or you've got to go through this door. No, we're going left. Okay, the door's in front of you. How do you keep that game credible? How do you keep your players engaged?
I've already explained it. And like I said, you're doing exactly what I said you were going to do. So you've basically said that you're starting with ETU. Let's just say you said Degrees of Horror, you picked the first campaign. So that campaign tells a story. That first plot point campaign tells a story. You need to get your players from point A to point B. And you're doing it. But you're saying somehow in the middle, you let your players go off to the Arctic on some kind of Arctic adventure, and then somehow you have to get back around to the end of it. Like no matter how you say that you're doing it, it's still railroading because you're starting.
As well.
If you're starting from point A and going to point B, which is the beginning and the end, no matter how you get to point A to point B, you're on railroad tracks. If that makes sense.
Except that I've started at point A, found that point A was not leading to point B, so I've the players have organically created point C. So without giving too much of Degrees of Horror plot away, it revolves around a big component of is a lady that's been around for a long time and she's working behind the scenes. She doesn't exist in my plot point campaign. She's been replaced with another character with different motivations because I could see I started throwing out the hooks for the game and the players just didn't respond. And not that they weren't understanding it, it just didn't catch them. It didn't tickle their fancy. So like with any other module that I've ever run, which is few, I've adapted it on the fly to embrace the needs and wants of the characters that they're playing, right? So the lady in this story has been replaced with someone I've called the Smiling Man, and he has had completely different motivations. I've adapted parts that they come across in that plot point campaign, like the necklace and stuff like that, but they don't do, while the ghost is still there, that it doesn't actually do the other things that it mentions it does within the plot point campaign. And I've used a lot of the side quest stuff that's in the actual ETU book, and they're purely random. So passing the exams, one of the characters passed the exams with flying colors, and it led to an adventure that I talked about before with someone messing up a ritual which created an assassin that would kill this girl. They had 10 hours to keep this girl alive. That's nothing in the plot point campaign. That has led to our zombie. There's no zombies in that first year of the plot point campaign. I couldn't even tell you what's in the second year yet. I haven't read it. And look.
So here,
I can look.
I have a question for you.
Hey,
I have a question for you. So you start off with Degrees of Horror. What part of this plot point campaign are you playing at this point? Because it sounds to me like you've gone from starting with the idea of the Degrees of Horror plot point campaign, and you just ran a completely separate adventure, which was basically 10 hours for this girl to live.
No, because I've still used the basis of the scenarios within it, but because the characters have changed due to the actions of the players, the motivations of certain scenes have changed. It's no longer the core plot point campaign. I'm just using it as a skeleton.
That's what I just said. You're not running the plot point campaign anymore.
Yeah, but that's
do you know what I mean?
You're right. I'm not running a plot point campaign, and I think anyone that runs the plot point from campaign from go to woe in the fashion that you mentioned, that would just bore me as a player, dude. I don't know how you do it. Because you're essentially telling me that I've got no control. I'm just along for the ride.
No, the way Gary's saying
I'm going to do that. I'm going to watch TV.
In defense of what Gary said, is that he will make the players feel as if they have agency by saying to them, like, let's say, for example, he was saying the players are on the train and the book says that they have to find a hole, right? Now, the players can
at the front of the train.
At the front of the train.
The train crashes in. Yes.
So the players can do whatever they want, and Gary will allow them to do whatever they want and have agency and feel like it's an open world. So if the players say, "I want to get drunk, get off at the next stop, and go and find some hookers," well, that then Gary will allow that to happen. But as they go to the buffet car, instead the hole's there.
Yeah. I got that bit.
So it's like
I got that bit.
That's that's a quantum ogre, but I think you guys are missing the point for plot point campaigns. If you read, next time you open the book, look at the start of each plot point adventure. Okay, the first part says when, and then it tells you when this plot point adventure happens. So until that trigger happens, you don't move on to the next plot point adventure. Yeah. If you look at the flood, you have three adventures in a row that you have to run right in a row. They're on the railroad, definitely, because no pun intended, you're under the underground and there's a railroad. But what Conrad is asking is, in between those triggers, once you complete one plot point adventure, the time between that one and the next one, how do you make that world feel open? Well, and that is by asking the players and their characters what their goals are for their characters. Like for, I don't know, ETU could be one of the students. She wants to become a cheerleader. She's not, she just started. She wants so you run adventures in between the plot point adventures, story arcs, character arcs about that character and what she needs to go through. That's what he's asking.
That's what I kind of did in my
Solomon Kane campaign. So I've got...
Sorry.
No, go on.
That's what I kind of did in my Solomon Kane campaign, because we had, it wasn't, as I say, a plot point campaign, but we did have plot points in it where the guys had to go kill these monsters and take their power and all of this stuff. But in between, let's say, for example, a very, very easy way to make the world feel open is, well, you're not going to just be doing the plot the whole time. Sometimes the players are going to need to do other stuff. And I saw this great article. I'll try to link it, but all it was an article about what to do with excess money in RPGs. And it was just a cool thing. Like, you can, it was saying things like, oh, you can use it to build up your wagon, or you can use it to spend money on the town, or things like this. Anyway, the characters would then, when they're not doing the missions, let's say, for example, they're just waiting around for a boat or something like this to get to the next country, I would be like, okay, well, you got 2 hours. What do you guys want to do? And they'd be like, well, we could always do with money. Let's try and earn some money. So it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do to earn that money? And then they would have to mooch around in the open world for a bit, just doing stuff and existing, and then inevitably stuff would happen. I mean, we had a whole episode, and I know that people will often turn their nose up at this and think it's rubbish, but we had a whole episode where things just spiraled out of control because somebody tried to nick money from a cash register, fell over, got noticed, and then he as he was trying to leave, the girl that worked at the bar grabbed him, the police came, then they ran, they went to a shop, and then they had a shootout with the police and all of this stuff. And it just escalated because they just didn't want to go to jail and wanted to catch the boat to go to France. And it was just hilarious. Like, that to me was really good. And that's what makes it feel like an open world, because it was a very, very easy way. Just, okay, you've got 2 hours to wait for a boat. What do you do? And they're always going to find something to do. I mean, I know people don't like that downtime necessarily, but I personally thought that it was a good way to make it feel open. And as Eric said, another one is little side missions as well. Maybe you're just on the way to something and you notice something or whatever.
So, in that exact example for what I do for ETU, so there's a couple of things that my players want to explore. One of them wants to be, well, his character is the backup quarterback. So we have some role playing where it's involved where he's got is essentially the starting quarterback is kind of like his nemesis at the moment. So he's doing everything to sort of be a pain to this character, and so that he doesn't become the starting quarterback. So that we have that sort of element of a side story. We also, at the end of one of the plot points, there was some NPCs that were brought in, such as one of my players, who's a guy, is playing a female cheerleader, as I mentioned before. And part of his story he came out with was he gave me this NPC, which was a guy who was part of the ROTC. And while they were dating, which was in part of the plot point, the boyfriend sees the chupacabra, sees the monster, right? And so when that scene finished and we came back for the next session, I asked him, I said, well, what do you think this NPC, Chris, his name was, what do you think, Chris, how do you think he's responded to all this? I mean, he's seen a monster now. And he said to me, oh, he couldn't cope, so we broke up. And I'm like, okay. So we explored this storyline about how Stephanie, the cheerleader, was all brokenhearted about the loss of her boyfriend. So the rest of the characters decided to take her out to a restaurant, and then that led into this story that led us into this Arctic line that we're in at the moment with Arctic zombies. That's what I do in between. So they had ages. I didn't create a restaurant. I didn't decide to take that character to a restaurant. That wasn't part of a plot point. They went, oh, we want to make Stephanie feel better, and they created that part. And on the fly, I've got to create the restaurant. I've got to create. Well, they can't just sit there at a restaurant. I'm not going to role play eating pizza. What can I do to make it a little more exciting? Bam! These dudes with like Men in Black come busting through, and there's this altercation in the restaurant, and then they get captured, and it leads on, and that was all organic. It all happened on the fly. So that's what I do.
Yeah, Gary, I don't think anybody is, arguing that at some point you'll have to bring it back to the next plot point episode. I mean, those need to happen in sequence, but it's those times in between the plot point campaign episodes that Conrad is trying to fill, because, I mean, I think it's how you present it, because if there's if there's a sense of urgency to move on to the next one, if at the end of one episode you already know that you need to go to the next one, it isn't really a true plot point campaign. It's just a sequential adventure, basically, because like I said, at the beginning of each plot point episode, or most of them anyway, if you read 50 Fathoms, it says when you arrive to this place you can run this adventure. It's a trigger. Every plot point episode as a trigger, but in between those triggers, that's how plot point campaigns were built, so that you can put your own material in between them. Even at some point, for some of them, they say when the characters reach veteran. What if it's after the second plot point episode? Then they're probably still novice. You need to fill this time in between. Of course, you can just say, all right, now you guys are veteran, we'll move on to the next one. But it isn't how it was built, what it was built for.
I'm gonna have to concede Gary's point about the actual triggers for the plot points. You're right. There is, while within that arc, there are points where I have to go that no matter where the players go, they'll hit the trigger. In ETU, it's really based around each year. So the freshman year, the sophomore year, that's what triggers it. But I think there's also an issue of pacing, which the gentleman that asked the question, like if we were to run ETU, just bang, 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 do all freshmen, then go into sophomore, the pacing would seem really wrong. And in ETU, you've got to put in those elements of the exams and what happens in the down. There has to be downtime. There has to be some background to those characters for there to be a reason for them to continue on with the story and the friendship and work together. Did you not have that?
Yeah, I remember when Gary first ran 50 Fathoms, he was asking me, because there's that I think it's the second episode where you go visit Tressa the Red or whatever, but it says, and I don't have the book up, but it says there needs to be some time that passed in between those two, and you need to fill it where characters are on a boat and now they're going to land on somewhere on an island, and they're probably not going to find Tressa right away. So you need to fill that space in between. And I mean, that's probably why I don't run plot point campaigns, because yeah, in the end, they're a railroad each episode, and yeah, that's why. But the time in between, there's still a lot to go around with, especially with 50 Fathoms. I mean, they could visit every spot on the map and take him to legendary before they even need to move on to the next point. There's just so much to explore there, so much material. But I think to start with, you need to find out what your characters, what they want out of this campaign. That's where the player agency comes in. Like I said, the girl that wants to join the cheerleaders, and like you said, the guy who's QB2 and he wants to be the first quarterback now. He wants to be the starter one. That gives you an idea of what you can put in your plot point campaign to draw them out of running the episodes in sequence. That's the first thing you ask. And then, NPCs, they're gonna, like Gary said with his Magic Mike, they want to go back to that guy could be the one giving them a sidetrack adventure. So you need to focus on what the players are interested in.
Also, when they build the characters, at least in ETU, there's elements that they can take. So I've got a character that's got a nemesis, right? That was part of the hindrance that they took. That nemesis has to come up in the game and be part of it, or what was the point of them putting it on the character? They put it on that character sheet because they wanted to interact with a bully or someone that was giving them a hard time. The curse they take, that's got to interact somehow. It's not written in the plot point, but it has to be explored at some point. So, yeah, to me, the game is what happens in between the plot points. the railroady bit is the plot point. You're absolutely correct. I concede that point. Even with me changing who the bad guys are, I'm still going by the triggers of the plot point campaign, and by that I am railroading my character. Damn, man, that hurt to say. I'm railroading my characters along the story, but the agency that they
what was
have
that? I had you on mute. What was that? You do what? What was that?
Yeah. I moved the story along in the direction as per dictated by the plot point campaign, and don't make me say that again. That really hurt. So, but the in between components between the triggers, that's the part where the players get to explore what they want, and that can fit in. There's the plot point doesn't restrict anything. Maybe that specific story it does, but everything that happens in between, none of that is restricted. And you can open it up and you can play it and you can do those in-between bits for as long as you want to.
Gary played it. Was that what Jamie ran? Did he run the Degrees of Horror? And you guys still got to do your stuff, right?
I don't know what particular plot point campaign he ran. Like, I remember the stories and stuff and all of that kind of stuff, and it was great fun, and it never felt railroady at all, ever. It was so much fun. It was fantastic. Him running that campaign, ETU, said it before, ETU has to be given the Sleeper Award for, like, best setting. You don't realize it until you start playing it, how much fun it is and how cool the idea behind it is. ETU is, like, wickedly good.
Better than 50 Fathoms?
Yes.
Nope. Nothing is better than 50 Fathoms. I don't even know why those words would come out of your mouth unless you wanted to get slapped in the face.
They came out of yours. You said best setting.
Did I say that? Damn it. I'll be right back.
Hey, Gary.
The best. Yes, sir.
So the character that you played in that ETU game, who was it? What was it?
Her name was something Louise Uwanda Thurman.
Susie Lou.
Susie Lou Uwanda Thurman. And she was the cheerleader of the bunch, I believe. Yeah, she was the cheerleader of the bunch. But I turned her into this raving psychotic chick that basically was in love with, secretly in love with Stefan Dragonspawn's character, who turned out to be gay. And she was making all of these weird behind the scenes made up stuff. Like, in her head, anytime she saw Stefan's character with somebody, it just crushed her, and she would just go off and do like crazy lunatic stuff. But she was the crazy girlfriend that turned out that was the cheerleader.
So did you create the character from scratch?
Player agency. You had fun with player agency, basically. Huh?
And you guys have not watched it? I feel bad for you. Susie Lou Uwanda Thurman was like the epic player.
You're taking it away from your players, but you want when you play, you want player agency. But when
what did I say earlier? I said it is a rare find. I named him by name, the guy that will actually change the story. So I named that guy by name.
I will say this. Shut up a minute, Paris. Right, I will say this. I've played in Gary's games, and I always feel like I have agency. While I do feel like we're going along a bit of a choo-choo, I do feel like from scene to scene, we always have agency. I mean, put it this way: when we played a game once that was set in an old people's home that Gary ran for us, and there was a bit where there was going to be a wheelchair race. And Eric and I said we wanted to mod the car and stuff, mod our wheelchairs so that it had nitrous on it and all of this. I mean, that was totally off the books and we could do it. Yes, it didn't really affect the plot. We were still doing the plot points that Gary had on this, but I still felt like I could do whatever I want. If I said to Gary, I want to go up to the villain, take a dump in his bed and then set it on fire, he would still let us do that. I mean, it's still fun to play in his games, and you never feel like you're being railroaded. It's still fun, and you're going along a story that he's made, but it's not like a proper railroad. I feel like we've lost the definition a bit. A railroad is when you're saying, I want to do this, and the DM's like, no. There's a big difference. Player agency, I feel like I always have a lot when I'm playing Gary's games. But I feel like what Conrad wants to know is sort of like feeling like the world is open, yet still going along that path. And that is something I don't reckon that maybe your games have, because if you're going along the plot points, well, you're not going to be going out into the open world and doing whatever the hell you want, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's a very, very hard thing to do, because if you're following somebody else's story, there isn't a bit where it says, now go and do whatever the hell you want. In fact, a lot of plot points do have that, but I don't know. Would do a lot of people do that? No, they wouldn't. They would just have set missions and things like this.
Conrad even says it. The very first sentence he says is, "I'm always struggling to show the players just how open the world is." That leads into my point. The players basically just follow where you tell them to go, and it is a rare Michael Whitmer find when you have somebody that will grab the story by the nose and take it where he wants it to go. So, but I don't know.
But didn't the players tell you what they wanted when they created their characters? When you look at their hindrances, when you look at their little backstory or their edges, or there must be things in there on those characters that you go, well, actually, I can apply that bit and we can take it outside the realm of the plot point and explore that bit for a while. And so that maybe between this plot point and that plot point, we're going to focus on this character and this character. And then between that plot point and the next plot point, we're going to focus on these other two characters and we'll explore their story a bit more. Right. So in your game, are you saying that these characters being played don't exist beyond the plot point campaign? They have no story to tell outside of that realm.
The players?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm going to tell you.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's not by my choice, it's by their interaction with the story. Basically, usually what I find in all of my years of DMing random people, they will, let's say they walk into a town, nobody will ever initiate the duel by themselves. I have to offer the Benny and then make the story up on the spot. Nobody will ever be, no player has ever sat down, albeit Michael Whitmer did, and said, and started telling me a story about all of a sudden he sees his arch nemesis across the way and he's like, none of you have probably ever even seen that. It is a rare find, man.
I don't see that kind of thing, but I've never seen that kind of thing, but I've seen plenty of people guide the story. I mean, I played most of my campaigns a player run. I'll let them run and do what they want. I mean, the thing is, my Solomon Kane game, that was, I provided the missions, but they chose the direction. But I did a GURPS campaign once, which was pretty much entirely run by the players. It was them doing what they want. They set the goals, and they were the ones that guided the entire campaign. They didn't just make up details in the world, because that's ridiculous. But the thing is that because you could just say, now I turn into a jet and I bomb the Russians. I mean, no, you don't, because that's ridiculous. Shut up.
There's no Russians in Solomon Kane, is there?
No, there are.
Didn't you put Nazis in your campaign?
No, I didn't.
As I'm listening to you guys talk, I'm thinking about definitions. I'm wondering whether we've got the definitions right. Like now, what Gary's talking about with this gentleman that can make stuff up that helps create the world, right? I do struggle with that at work with the guys that I play with, just because they're learning, I guess, to interact with the world. So that's a big thing for them. But my friends that I've played with over years, I've had players that have done that have introduced at least elements and components. Their characters alone generate that. That maybe this is the definition that I'm missing, because the way that I play is the story is not the plot point campaign. The story is not the adventure. The story is the story of the characters. They are the heroes. This is their story. So I have to find within those characters those elements that make them shine, that make them the heroes of the story, and then I apply that to what's relevant within the world that we're playing.
Yeah, because otherwise,
don't you do that?
It would be like having a film, right? Watching a film. And instead of the camera focusing on the main characters, it constantly turns around, focuses on the director, and he's giving you a thumbs up.
Or the villain.
Yeah, or the villain.
Yeah, it'd be like watching the movie from the villain's perspective the entire time, and there's these idiots running around in the background, keep bashing his minions and stealing.
You know what?
His shit.
That actually sounds like a good film.
What are you doing?
I would watch that.
Hell yeah, best movie ever.
And not only that,
I think we've just
he's going, hey, they're running away from me. Quick, put that hole over there so they get to me.
You know what? I think we've actually.
He doesn't want them to get there.
I think we've accidentally just proved that Gary's way of doing things is awesome, because that movie would be really cool. I would watch the hell out of that.
I think part of it is a lot of us, and I don't know Conrad's group, but a lot of us come with a lot of baggage when we play a game where we're used to sitting down and letting the DM tell us a story, and then we get a couple cues in there where, okay, this is my part, this is my turn, now I get to do something. And that's been drilled into us for a long time, where now when you're the GM and you ask the players, what do you want to do? They don't know, because they've been told for years that, wait, I don't really have a say here. What's going on with, I need a description of the room and then I'll interact with it. So I think it's about the presentation, how you present a scene and the events. Like I was telling Paris before the game, I've been reading again a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games lately, and it is very eye-opening how you can actually make create a story together without basically a GM creating anything. He's just asking questions, and you need to ask questions to the players. How do you feel right now? How does your character feel about this situation? The player might ask you, okay, so what does that guy look like? Well, you can turn that question back around. I don't know. What does he look like? What does he want? And that's how you can make the players feel more involved in the story. Last month I played in the Blades in the Dark game ran by Eli Kurtz, and it is heavily influenced Powered by the Apocalypse game, where we basically made up our own story on the fly with our characters. We started with world building, character building, and then we played the mission that we basically decided what it was going to be. And this was the most involved as a player I've been in, I can't remember how long. And it was the most fun for me because of that, because at some point I get inside a train cart, and there's this MacGuffin, this object that is the center of the adventure, but we don't know what it is. And the GM asked me, what is it? So I tell him it looks like the Ark of the Covenant, and it's got Tesla coils on it, and it's called the Demon's Lung, and that's why the bad guys wanted that item, because they could destroy someone else with it. And now I decide to interact with it and use it to defeat the bad guy, but at the same time I lose my life from using it. That's the price that my character had to pay. And then I become I turn into something else. It's a different philosophy. It's a different way of gaming. And when you've been playing for 35 years, like, Paris, Gary, and I, and even Harrison for 15 years, it's hard to make the mind switch for that. But I think there's room for it. But at the end of the day, some people just don't like to game like that. They just want to sit and be told what's going on and, swing their sword when it's time. It's their turn, It's
a quick question about that. And I was thinking about why people accept the railroad. So as you were explaining it, my first question, the question that jumped in my mind was, how do you know what's there? How do you know what the world is? Is everything created from scratch? So if to me, a plot point campaign is an introduction to that world. At least, yeah, that's what it is. It's an introduction to that world. And the downtimes, the in-between bits, are where the players get to explore more and ask more questions about what's not in that direct plot line, and get to look around and explore their own characters within that story. So in this Powered by the Apocalypse, and I've heard this come up a number of times, people said I should look at it for the work that I do. What I haven't had a chance to wrap my head around with it yet is, if I take that to a completely blank slate of people, right, and go, tell me what this is, how do you stop them all looking at you blankly? Where does the prompts come from? Where there must be something that they can tether their ideas to, surely.
Well, I mean, in that particular example, we had an idea of the world. I mean, there was some description given to us that we work within, that frame. So we couldn't just make up something that was inconsistent with the world. And that's where the GM can come in and say, hey, that doesn't really fit with the story right now,
I also had that reaction before when I've said make stuff up, and sometimes I often do it in Savage Worlds. Let's say, for instance, if somebody gets a really wicked crit and destroys somebody, it's not a crit, it's an exploding die, but I still call it a crit, old habits, and they utterly destroy an enemy, right? Sometimes you'll be like, okay, describe the kill. And sometimes players will look at you blankly because they're used to the GM being, you chop the goblin's head off and the blood spurts all over the room. But no, you can often say to somebody, how you describe the kill. And the way to open it up, when you ask somebody, hey, what is that thing? And get them to describe the world. But instead of just saying, what is it? And then looking at them, and they're gonna have no time to prepare. Start the sentence by saying, oh, by the way, there are some details that you can fill in this world. So now, with the case, what is it? Say it like that rather than just going, what is it? And then pointing at them and they go, a dildo.
Well, I mean, I think there's always going to be people that don't like being put on the spot, because that's what it feels like to a lot of people. But if you warm them up, you don't go cold all of a sudden and decide to be that kind of GM. You need to warm the players up to that idea by filling in little details once in a while. It could be an NPC that you describe, but you leave out, what the color of his clothes are, and they can make that up. They still got a little bit of an idea, but they fill in the details of it, and it takes practice. I mean, especially like I said, if you've been doing it for over 30 years a certain way, you can't just switch like that. People aren't wired that way.
So going back to Conrad's question just real quickly, just one thing I thought of is, can you have too much player agency in a plot point campaign? Can you go too long within the pauses in between that you lose track of or the players lose track of the plot point?
I was just thinking that myself, and I think you absolutely could.
Isn't it the journey, the point, though, not the destination?
No.
Yeah, but
destination.
For me, I'd be 100%. happy. I'd be happy for it to run in any direction it wants to go. Like if, my other question to Gary would be, what if you got halfway through the plot point and the players just went, "This is shit. I don't want to play this." We would play
something else. Yeah,
and
just absolutely dead drop, done. So when I started playing 50 Fathoms, and like Eric said, I talked to him about it quite a bit. We did the first couple, like the first one basically is you're shipwrecked. That's how it all starts. And then you go from there. You find a boat, you fix your boat, some stuff happens, you duke some dudes out, and then you end up on a boat. Once they're on the boat, the very next one, you find a crab man in the water and you do some stuff with him. And that's when I gave the players the map. Now they have a map and they have a boat. And at that point, I'm like, go wherever you want. So they ended up going to this one town, and in this town, they went to this exotic. This lady collects exotic stuff, and so that led to this adventure that I built, where they went off into. Well, I didn't actually. Let me rephrase that. It leads to an adventure in the book that's not part of the plot point campaign. It's got to do with a bunch of mermaids and stuff. So I went from the plot point campaign to this adventure where I had to go duke out some mermaids and do some stuff. They captured a mermaid, brought her back, gave her to this lady. Some other things happened where they're in town trying to get a bigger boat or some stuff like that. Then in order to get to Teresa the Red, I created an adventure that I called the Red Channel. and it was like basically a bloodbath. As if you've ever seen the map of Korth Ta, there's this one section where there's a channel that goes from the top to the bottom, and I told him, I'm like, it's very dangerous to go this way. Nobody ever comes out the other side or lives to tell about it, or this is the channel that ghost ships are made of, kind of a thing. They come out with nobody on them, kind of a thing. Or you could go the long way around and risk running out of supplies or whatever. Well, they chose the channel. So I built all the adventures inside the channel. Eric, do you remember when I asked you about swarms? I'm like, why do swarms suck so much? And you're like, they auto hit. And I'm like, oh man, like that was a facepalm moment for me. Cause then I was like, in my American honeybee adventure, holy crap, man, when I figured out swarms auto hit, they were deadly. Like wickedly deadly swarms of bees. My swarms of piranhas, however, sucked ass, and my players are swimming through swarms of piranhas, and I'm like, they don't have a fighting skill. I don't get it. Anyways,
quick question, Gary. Sorry, I've got to ask this because you love 50 Fathoms, right? You absolutely love 50 Fathoms, good. Right? So, two real quick questions. If you hadn't got on that side quest adventure and just followed plot, bang, 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 do you think the game would have been as good? And two, because you love it so much, and you let's say you play the plot point, you get through to a certain point, and the characters you can see, you as a GM, you usually you can see when the players are starting to wane, right? Where they're just not, it's not for them anymore. Would you not then turn and go, nah, we're going in this direction that they would prefer to go in, but in this world that I love GMing in? Wouldn't you do that?
No. If my players aren't into it, I'll pull the pin. I'll pull the pin and throw it like a hot grenade. Don't care.
So then you don't get to play what you want to play.
Doesn't matter. I'm not in it for me. I'm in it for my players.
So you railroad your players
for their own benefit. Yeah,
that's right. They're like small children that I have to mold. So after the Red Channel, we did Teresa the Red. And as we were doing Teresa the Red, some stuff happened. I will give you some 50 Fathoms personal professional advice. Don't let any of your players be the captain, because as soon as one of them's the captain, they all want to be the captain. And the entire game basically turned into let's kill the captain. And then what happened was fireballs were created on board the ship in Teresa the Red's area, and the ship was sunk and exploded, and that ended the campaign before it even started, and we started playing Deadlands.
But see, I mean, at the beginning of the show, you said that you ran the plot point episodes in a row, but you didn't. That you ran it really more open-ended in between the episodes.
I don't want to confuse the situation. I did that with Deadlands.
Oh, okay.
And this is where I learned that I really wanted to play 50 Fathoms. I loved it right up until my players blew the boat up, and it was this constant fight between trying to, kill the captain, get rid of the captain, take him out. And then I'm like, you learn things. I've been playing this game for so bloody long. I know these stupid things now, but I still fail and still have to learn stuff. I ran 50 Fathoms in the sense, like, because we discussed it, you plot point at a certain level, they go to the next phase, and I would do stuff in between. But when it came time to do the Deadlands campaign, I realized I missed out on so much cool 50 Fathoms story stuff because I didn't follow the plot point from 1 to 1 to 1. I could have done 10 sessions of 50 Fathoms, and me and my players could have done the complete story and wrapped it up. I feel like it's a module that my players died in the middle of, and I never got to see what happened with the end boss guy. So when I started Deadlands, I just told them straight up, we're just doing the plot point campaigns. Every time you guys show up, it's going to be a new adventure. If we have to time travel and do all sorts of other stuff, this is what we're doing. And that's how my Deadlands campaign went. And I still only made it through probably 6 or 7 of the 10 that was in it before things basically went south, because it's time consuming, dude. Like, I mean, that's 7-8 months of running a Deadlands campaign, and you've gone through 7-8 adventures, because sometimes they carry over. You're doing maybe 1-2 a month. It can be time consuming, and if you want to get through it, and here's the other thing too with Savage Worlds. I'm speaking fast because I want to get through it. There's so much good stuff in Savage Worlds. This is one of my big complaints: is there's too many settings and not enough time. If you want to play the settings and you want to see the books, sometimes you got to do this kind of stuff. Now I know what the Flood is all about, and now I want to play other ones. I want to try out the Grim Prairie's Tales and see what that's about, or who's the next guy, the next horseman of the apocalypse, and what's his story? Because I know all about Grimes now because I read it.
So with just in that point, because you didn't make it to the end, would you give any advice to maybe play the plot point campaign for, let's say, the first or second arc, then take a break and go to something else? Reason I'm asking is I'm starting to see, even though my guys love ETU, following the same storyline or following everything sort of linking, I can start to see that bit of that. Does this end at any point? I think they're going to need a break. Is my point. So with your Deadlands campaign or your 50 Fathoms, do you think it would have been more successful? And maybe this will help the gentleman that asked the question. Is play, let's say, the first arc, have some of that, explore the world, maybe go to the next plot point, then take a break, and then come play something else, and then come back because there's so many cool Savage World settings out there. And just keep it fresh then. Or are you in danger with a plot point of it just going too long? Because they are really long. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, they are. And actually, I've never tried it, but that would actually probably be a good idea. Switch it up. Couple of sessions of this, couple of sessions of that, couple of sessions of this. Might be a good idea. Might be something to try out.
Maybe you could do it using TimeZero and hop between them.
Let's wrap this up.
Yo, motherfuckers, you all best back up. I always got a gun, I always come strap up. What I'm trying to say is it's time for the wrap up. Yeah, this one goes out to all the ladies and all the men out there. Everyone in the front row, grease up. Yeah.
All right, so we're running a bit long today, so I'm going to try and wrap this up really fast. If you want to contact us, you can email us at thewilddie@gmail.com, or we are on the Google Plus network, on Facebook and YouTube. We're all at the Wild Die Podcast. So of course, we're on the Nerds International community if you want to mingle with us as well. And of course, we're on Twitter at the Wild Die, and we are on Patreon as well if you want to chuck us back for all the nice stuff that we do. That's patreon.com/the Wild Die if you want to support the show. And at this point, we would like to thank all of our patrons for all of their contributions that they make. Here we go.
Sean Richard, Jason Connolly, J. Raz Alan Bray, Mr. Stag, Conrad Erasmus Neubert, Corey Dersham, Pure Mongrel, Sofia, Rob Tau, CJ Stott, Bubbles, Peter Adams, Gil Dashard, John Peterson, Remy Billato, Here I Go, yes, 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 yes. Get your boys on marchable right there in the spotlight, lunchables, cause boys like you trying to take the biscuit, trying to brush me up while you're betting on ripped it.
Yeah. And new patron, Remy Bilodeau.
Good name,
Thank you.
That is a good name. Solid name.
I really like the way you pronounced that. That was spelled. That was solid.
So any ladies listening, or any gays, they're loving that right now.
Eric, I did tell you that my wife said you have like a seriously sexy voice, didn't I? I told you that. She's like the one person that you probably know that thinks you sound good on podcasts.
Yeah, that was to make me feel good about myself, because that was around the time where I was getting a lot of bad feedback about my voice. So
we still get the bad feedback. I just don't let you see it.
Yeah, well, you should see how many emails we get that talk about the drunk Frenchman on the show.
It's all good. All right, well, Conrad, I hope you got maybe 5 minutes worth of interesting tips in there. I mean, at least it created some interesting conversation. We will see you guys next time. And this is Eric saying, grab your sword by the balls.
And this is Harrison saying, Australia is so cool. I wish I lived there. Imagine living in a place where the sun shines and the beer is cold. It sounds like heaven. I think Paris might have written my ending line for me.
I know Gary's written mine, or half of it. Or this is Paris saying, I like England, all the sexy boys there. I want to go and smooch them all, and in their bum, apparently.
Bums. In their bums.
Bums.
Them in yeah, get it right, man. Anyways, that's cool. Thanks for the great episode, guys. It's been a lot of fun. Conrad, suck it. I hate you and your stupid freaking message that you made us talk about for hours. This is Gary saying... Don't hate me because I'm fabulous. Keep your pants on. Keep it fun. Thanks, everyone. We're out.
Yes.
This is Paris saying, I like England, all the sexy boys there. I want to go and smooch them all, and in their bum, apparently. I like England, all the sexy boys there. I want to go and smooch them all, and in their bum. In their bum. Sexy boys bum. Explore the boys bum.
The Wild Die Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group or official Pinnacle licensees. Any of the products mentioned on our show or appear on our website are the property and copyright of the respected owners. All music and artwork is used with permission of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All items are used under fair use and educational and review purposes. All other items are the intellectual property of the Wild Die Podcast.